Hello everyone, I'm here to tell you some scary stories, but in a way that helps you relax and fall asleep. If you enjoy these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps a lot. Also, tell me in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it right now. Now take a deep breath, listen to the gentle sound of the rain, and let your mind drift into the dark, peaceful world of tonight's story. Moving in. We had moved into that rental apartment when I was 15. At first, everything seemed normal, or at least as normal as it could be when you're shifting into a new place. The building was old but well maintained, the rooms bright and airy with sunlight streaming through the windows in the afternoons. My mom unpacked dishes in the kitchen while I carried boxes of my things into my bedroom, the faint scent of fresh paint lingering in the air. Yet almost immediately, subtle oddities began to manifest. At first, I brushed them off as simple malfunctions of an old building. Our wall clock stopped ticking randomly. The refrigerator would abruptly die no matter what we tried, and the TV would shut off mid-program, even when the remote wasn't in use. We checked the plugs, the circuits, and eventually called an electrician. He examined everything thoroughly, testing wires, sockets, and switches, yet he couldn't find a single problem. "The wiring looks fine," he muttered, scratching his head. "But these appliances, they shouldn't be failing like this. Everything seems normal." I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just a series of coincidences, old appliances failing, and my imagination running wild. But when these incidents began happening more frequently, it became impossible to ignore. A subtle sense of unease crept in, like a cold draft slipping into the room when no windows were open. The first incident that truly terrified me happened one afternoon when my mom had left soup simmering on the stove while she busied herself in another room. I had just finished showering and stepped out into the hallway. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of orange glow near the kitchen. My heart skipped a beat. I froze for a second, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Then I saw it. Flames curling up from the gas regulator. I felt my chest tighten, and a rush of adrenaline hit me like a punch. I didn't think. My hands moved instinctively to turn off the cylinder regulator. The fire subsided immediately, leaving behind the lingering acrid scent of scorched metal. My mom rushed in seconds later, eyes wide in panic, but I barely had the strength to speak. I don't understand," she stammered, voice trembling. "It shouldn't have. You turned it off just in time." I could only nod, my mind spinning. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was realization. Something in that apartment was wrong. Something that couldn't be explained by faulty wiring or human error. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, listening to the faint creaks and groans of the apartment as it settled. Shadows stretched across the walls, and every flicker of movement in the corner of my vision made my pulse spike. I tried to convince myself it was normal. The sound of an old building, my imagination, but a chill ran through me, relentless, refusing to fade. By the next morning, the unease had escalated. We discovered that the ceiling fan in the living room had fallen overnight. No one had been in that room, yet the fan lay on the floor, broken. The memory of the fire flashed in my mind, and a shiver ran down my spine. My mom and I exchanged glances, neither of us speaking. It was too frightening to discuss aloud. Even during the day, the apartment seemed alive with subtle disturbances. Objects seemed slightly out of place when we returned to rooms. Lights flickered for no reason, and the air carried a weight that felt unnatural. I began to sense something watching me, just beyond the edges of my vision. It wasn't constant, but when it happened, my chest tightened and my breath caught. That night I stayed up reading after dinner, trying desperately to distract myself. I got up to switch off the lights, and when I turned back, I froze. There in the dark I saw it, the shadow of a man, silent, still, just standing there. My heart pounded violently in my chest. My brain screamed that it was impossible, but my body responded before my mind could process. I ran, straight through the shadow, and barely made it to the safety of my room. I didn't sleep that night. I could feel the weight of the apartment pressing in on me. And when I finally drifted, it was not into peace, but into nightmares that blurred with reality. By that first week, I was already aware that something in that apartment was not right. Something unseen, something patient, something that thrived on fear was present. And it was only the beginning. The next few days were worse. It was as if the apartment had started testing us, probing for fear and feeding on it. The refrigerator stopped working again, this time mid-afternoon, leaving our food spoiled in the heat. The wall clock froze at 3:17 p.m. over and over, no matter how many times we reset it. Even the television would flicker and die when no one touched it. We called the electrician again, a furrowed brow on his face. "I don't know what's wrong," he said, opening the panels of the fuse box. "The wiring is fine. Everything's connected properly. Honestly, I've never seen anything like it." His uncertainty only made the apartment feel heavier, the shadows longer. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps pacing in the hallway. Sometimes late at night, I could hear faint murmurs like someone whispering just beyond my door. I would hold my breath, heart hammering, only to find the hallway empty. Then came the fire incident. My mom had left soup simmering on the stove while she went to clean another room. I had just finished showering and stepped out into the hallway when I saw a glow flickering from the kitchen. My chest tightened. My mind raced and I froze for a moment. Flames were curling up from the gas regulator in a slow, unnatural dance. My stomach twisted with panic, but I moved instinctively, shutting off the cylinder just in time. The smell of scorched metal lingered in the air, acrid and thick, and my mom rushed in, eyes wide, voice trembling. "How? You turned it off just in time." I shook my head, unable to speak. Fear had left me drained, but there was something darker than exhaustion. It was the realization that this was no accident. Something unseen in the apartment had orchestrated it, and it had nearly killed us. That same day, the ceiling fan in the living room fell to the floor. The metal frame twisted grotesquely. We hadn't been in the room, not even a single person. The sheer impossibility of it was terrifying. We didn't speak of it. None of us wanted to say it out loud, because to do so might acknowledge it, but we all felt it. The undeniable, suffocating sense that the apartment was alive in ways it shouldn't be. Nightfall brought a new kind of terror. I stayed up reading after dinner, trying to distract myself from the oppressive heaviness that clung to the apartment. When I got up to switch off the lights, I froze. In the dark corner of the room, I saw it, a shadow of a man. Tall, silent, completely still. My body screamed at me to move. My mind screamed that it couldn't be real, yet I knew deep down it was. I ran. I didn't hesitate, didn't think. I barreled past the shadow and slammed the door behind me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt my chest. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, hearing whispers, sensing movement just beyond my sight. The apartment had crossed a threshold. It was no longer just strange or faulty. It was alive, and it was watching. By the end of that week, my body and mind were breaking under the weight of fear. I developed a fever that doctors couldn't explain, fainting spells that made standing unbearable. I was trapped in a house that seemed to breathe and move with malevolent intent, and I didn't know if it was real, or if my mind had begun to betray me. The trauma didn't end when we left the apartment. I moved away from that space physically, but the memories clung to me. Even now, I still suffer from nightmares and sleep paralysis, too scared to sleep alone. The shadow, the fire, the ceiling fan, the whispers, all of it stays in the corners of my mind, waiting. By the second week in that apartment, it no longer felt like a place to live. It felt like a living entity watching us, breathing around us. The walls seemed to hum faintly, as if resonating with an energy just beyond human perception. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, even in broad daylight, shifting imperceptibly when no one was looking. Every object felt slightly off. An inch to the left, a door slightly ajar when we hadn't touched it. Lights flickering in a pattern that made no sense. Appliances continued to fail unpredictably. The refrigerator would shut down mid-use, leaving food to spoil. The wall clock stopped at 3:17 p.m. almost daily, though no power surge occurred. The TV flickered to static even when unplugged and plugged back in. We called the electrician again. He spent hours checking circuits, breakers, and wiring. "There's nothing wrong," he said flatly, rubbing his temples. "Electrically. It should work fine. I don't understand it." The lack of explanation only tightened the grip of fear. I began to sense the apartment's presence everywhere. In the kitchen, where the fire had nearly started, I could feel an oppressive heat that wasn't there. In the living room, where the ceiling fan had fallen, a cold draft clung to my skin. The place had memory. It remembered the events, and it seemed to respond almost deliberately to our fear. One night I had taken a quick shower and stepped into the hallway. A faint light flickered from the kitchen. I froze. The gas regulator, which had burned flames days before, glimmered unnaturally. I couldn't breathe. My mother was in another room, oblivious, and I had to act fast. Instinct took over, and I switched off the regulator. But that second, that moment when the fire almost surged again, stayed burned into my mind forever. The next evening, while reading after dinner, I encountered the shadow again. I had told myself it was imagination, but it was real. There in the dark corner of the room, a tall, silent figure lingered. The darkness around it seemed deeper, denser, and my chest tightened. My legs moved on their own, running past the shadow as though my body had its own will, separate from my mind. Sleep became impossible. Lying in bed, I could feel the apartment watching, breathing over me. Every creak, every draft, every slight movement of the ceiling fan shaft or curtain was amplified into a terrifying presence. Whispers would ripple through empty rooms. Doors would slowly creak open and close with no one around. I began waking in the middle of the night, heart racing, unable to distinguish between dream and reality. By the end of that second week, I had developed a fever doctors could not explain. My body felt weak, fragile. I would faint even when trying to stand. Each new day felt heavier, each night darker. The apartment was no longer a building. It had become a trap, a place where fear manifested, where unseen eyes studied me, feeding off my terror. Even when we finally moved out, the fear didn't leave. The shadow, the fire, the fan, the whispers, they followed me in memory, clinging to my mind, leaving me with the lasting effects of trauma, sleep paralysis, anxiety, and the absolute terror of being alone at night. The apartment had left a mark, a lingering imprint of something I could not explain, something that had felt alive, intelligent and terrifyingly patient. By the third week in the apartment, the atmosphere had become unbearable. Every corner seemed alive. Every shadow shifted unnaturally when I wasn't looking. The flickering lights that had been minor annoyances before now felt like deliberate signals, as if the apartment itself was communicating. One evening, after dinner, I stayed up reading in my room. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp. As I got up to switch off the lights, I froze. In the corner of my eye, I saw it, the shadow again. Taller than a man, perfectly still, almost waiting. My chest tightened. My legs moved on instinct. I ran, barreling past it, heart hammering. But unlike before, the shadow seemed to linger even as I left the room. That night, sleep was impossible. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the wind brushing against the window, became amplified, terrifying. I would lie in bed, paralyzed, staring at the ceiling, unable to move even when my heart pounded. Sleep paralysis began creeping in, freezing me mid-dream. In those moments, I could sense a presence in the room, dark, patient, almost tangible, watching me. Then came the small, subtle attacks on the apartment itself. The ceiling fan continued to shake even after being repaired. Objects on shelves would fall with no warning, and the stove would turn on briefly, as if the fire incident wanted to replay itself. Every malfunction was unpredictable, leaving a lingering tension. I never knew when the next event would strike. The psychological toll was immense. I became jumpy, my body constantly alert. I flinched at every sound, every shadow. I felt trapped in a house that wasn't just haunted, it was alive. It seemed to understand me, reading my fear and amplifying it. I couldn't tell if what I was experiencing was real or the product of my terrified mind. But the terror was as real as the pounding in my chest. Even when I closed my eyes, the shadows continued to move behind my eyelids. The whispering began, soft at first, unintelligible, then slowly forming words I couldn't escape. I see you. I am here. By the end of that week, I felt my body breaking down. I had fever, dizziness, and fainting spells that doctors could not explain. It was as if the apartment's energy had seeped into my own body, draining me physically and mentally. The fear, the shadow, the inexplicable failures of objects, they were all connected, all feeding into an unending cycle of terror. Every night, I prayed for sleep, but it never came. Every creak, every flicker of light, every whisper reminded me that I was never alone. The apartment had claimed my peace, my rest, and my sense of reality. By the fourth week, the apartment seemed to have grown bolder, No longer subtle or hidden, its presence became aggressive. Every night the shadows crept closer, almost stretching toward me. I could feel them in my peripheral vision, flickering and twisting as if alive. The whispers intensified, forming words just at the edge of hearing. I see you. I am here. Don't sleep. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed up reading in my room, trying desperately to calm my nerves. The apartment seemed quiet at first, almost deceptively peaceful. Then came the flicker, a small lamp across the room blinking on and off in a pattern I couldn't ignore. My chest tightened. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Suddenly I felt it. Cold air brushing past me, brushing against my neck, though the window was closed. My hair stood on end. The shadow appeared again, taller and darker than before, pressing against the corner of my room like a living wall. My body froze. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My legs felt like they were made of lead. The presence was heavy, almost tangible, pushing down on me. Then the whispering changed. It was louder, more urgent, clearly forming words. Get up. Come, I am here. Paralyzed by fear, I tried to move, but my body refused. Sleep paralysis gripped me fully. And I realized this wasn't just in my mind. Something unseen was actively interacting with me. I struggled to breathe, sweat running down my face. Heart hammering so violently I thought my chest would burst. The refrigerator clicked violently in the kitchen. Lights flickered, and the ceiling fan above me shuddered as though reacting to the presence. Every object in the apartment seemed to respond, all eyes and ears amplifying my terror. I could hear the faint, metallic hum of the broken wall clock echoing in the distance, ticking irregularly. In sync with the shadow's movements, I finally summoned the courage to crawl to the corner of the bed, hoping to escape the shadow's gaze. The moment my hand touched the floor, the shadow lunged, or at least I felt it lunge, pressing against me with an invisible force. I screamed, a sound that felt alien even to me, tearing through the silence of the apartment. My mom rushed in, awakened by the scream. She flicked on the lights, and for a fleeting second, the shadow vanished. But the apartment was silent in a way that felt wrong, almost expectant. I collapsed into her arms, shaking uncontrollably. The whispers had stopped, but the weight remained, a palpable pressure in the room. After that night, my body began to weaken further. I became dizzy and fainted at the slightest movement. Doctors could not explain the fever, the fainting spells, or the constant tremors. The apartment had left its mark on me, not just in fear, but physically. Every night afterward, I lay awake, bracing for the next encounter, knowing that the apartment's presence was patient and cunning. It had tasted my fear, and it knew it could strike again at any moment. Even as we planned to move out, the terror lingered. Shadows haunted my dreams, whispers chased my thoughts, and my body refused to fully recover from the invisible assault. The apartment had claimed its victory, leaving me to live with the aftermath. By the 5th week in the apartment, it felt as if the walls themselves were alive. The presence was no longer subtle or fleeting. It was everywhere. Every room seemed to breathe and shift, shadows stretching and writhing even in daylight. The air itself carried a weight, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a struggle. The incidents intensified. Lights flickered violently. Appliances malfunctioned more aggressively, and the refrigerator would shut down mid-use, leaving rotting food behind. The ceiling fan that had fallen before now trembled in its mount, swaying slightly, as if it had a mind of its own. Objects moved inexplicably, books sliding off shelves, chairs tipping over, and doors creaking open despite being locked. Sleep became impossible. Every time I lay down, my body froze mid-motion, gripped by the cruel paralysis of the night. Shadows seemed to gather at the edges of my vision, and whispers, soft at first, grew into clear, insistent words. I see you. I am here. You cannot hide. I would try to get up, to scream, to escape, but my limbs refused to obey. The presence seemed to feed on my panic, each struggle making it stronger. I could feel it pressing on my chest, pressing into my skin, and the apartment seemed to pulse with life, alive and aware. One night, while crawling toward my bed, the shadow appeared again, taller and darker than ever before. It moved independently, gliding across the floor, cutting off my escape. My heart thundered. I screamed, a sound that felt jagged and raw, echoing through the apartment's suffocating silence. The whispering intensified, now louder, almost tangible. Do not run. I am your shadow. I am with you. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping, my body trembling uncontrollably. My mom rushed in, her voice shaking as she flicked on the lights. For a moment, the shadow vanished, but the tension lingered like a storm cloud refusing to break. Physically, I was breaking down. The fever persisted. I fainted at the slightest movement. My muscles ached constantly, my heartbeat irregular. Doctors could not explain why my body was failing. They said stress, fatigue, but this was different. Something in that apartment had invaded my body, my mind, my very energy. Every day felt like walking through a nightmare. The apartment responded to my fear in real time. If I hesitated, lights would flicker. If I ran, objects would shift. If I tried to sleep, paralysis would grip me. Even mundane tasks became exercises in dread, as the apartment seemed to anticipate my every move. By the end of the week, I realized something horrifying. The apartment was no longer just a setting for fear. It had become a predator, and I was trapped inside its domain. My own mind felt like it belonged to someone else, always on edge, always anticipating the next shadow, the next flicker, the next whisper. The presence had claimed me. Not entirely, but enough to keep me terrified, isolated and broken. I knew that unless I left, this cycle would continue indefinitely. Even in my rare moments of calm, I felt its eyes on me, patient and relentless, waiting for my fear to spike again. And through it all, the whispers persisted, never fully gone, always returning when I tried to forget. I am here. You cannot hide. I see you. By the 6th week, the apartment had become a predator, stalking me at every hour. Every creak, flicker, and shadow was a calculated strike against my sanity. The presence no longer needed subtlety. It announced itself through violent, unpredictable events. One evening, I was reading in my room, trying to distract myself. The air suddenly went icy, so cold it burned my skin. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into intermittent darkness. I froze. A low hum, metallic and vibrating, filled the room, echoing through the walls. Then I saw it. A shadow taller than before, stretching across the floor toward me, twisting as though it had no fixed form. My legs locked. I tried to scream, but no sound came. Sleep paralysis gripped me. Even though I was awake, fully aware, completely trapped, the shadow loomed closer and whispers slithered into my mind. Do not run. Do not sleep. I am here. I tried to move my arms, my legs, anything, but the presence seemed to hold me down. Panic surged. My chest tightened and my breath became shallow. The refrigerator in the kitchen slammed shut violently, and the ceiling fan trembled, casting long, writhing shadows that seemed to merge with the dark figure in front of me. In sheer desperation, I forced a scream from my chest. The shadow recoiled for a moment, as though reacting to my defiance, but it didn't disappear. It merely lingered, patient and relentless. The whispers became clearer, more insistent. Fear feeds me. Your mind belongs to me. You cannot hide. I felt every object in the room respond. The lamp flickered, the books shifted, the walls seemed to pulse. The apartment itself was alive, reacting, amplifying the presence's power. My body trembled violently, fever burning me from inside, muscles twitching uncontrollably. I could barely stand. My own home had become an instrument of terror, orchestrating my collapse. My mom rushed in, heart racing, to find me trembling, gasping, and covered in sweat. When the lights flicked on fully, the shadow was gone, but the air still carried a weight, oppressive and unyielding. Even in the small, brief calm, I could feel the presence lingering at the edges of vision and mind, patient, waiting for the next moment of vulnerability. I collapsed onto the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The fever, the fainting spells, the paralysis, everything intensified. I was trapped in a nightmare that blurred the line between body and mind, between reality and hallucination. The apartment had claimed its dominion, and I was utterly aware of it. Even when I closed my eyes, the whispers continued, a soft echo threading through my consciousness. I see you. I am here, you belong to me. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, trembling, unable to distinguish reality from terror. The apartment had become a living entity, a predator, and I was its prey. By the 7th week, I was living in constant fear. Every sound, every flicker of light, every shadow caused my heart to race uncontrollably. The apartment had become a trap, relentless, sentient, and aware of every move I made. I could no longer ignore the presence. It was everywhere, pressing against my mind, feeding on my terror. One night after dinner, I sat in my room trying to read. The air suddenly turned frigid, colder than anything I'd ever felt. My lamp flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The whispering started softly, almost imperceptibly. "Do not sleep. Do not hide. I am here." Then it escalated. The shadows began to twist and writhe, moving as if alive. The ceiling fan trembled violently, and a loud crash came from the kitchen. The refrigerator door had swung open, sending a cascade of objects to the floor. I jumped to my feet, heart hammering, but my legs wobbled and refused to hold me. The familiar paralysis gripped me, leaving me helpless. The shadow appeared again, taller and darker than ever, filling the corner of my room. It moved independently, gliding toward me. I could feel an unseen pressure pressing down on my chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. The whispers became words, sharp and commanding. "Fear feeds me. Your body is mine. You cannot escape." I tried to scream. My throat felt raw and constricted. I struggled to move, but the presence held me tightly, twisting my perception of space and time. The room seemed to stretch unnaturally, objects bending and shaking as if reality itself had become pliable under its influence. The physical strain was unbearable. My muscles ached violently, my fever burned hotter, and my vision blurred from exhaustion. Every attempt to flee was met with resistance. Books toppled, chairs slid, shadows extended to block my path. The apartment wasn't just haunted. It was actively hunting me. In a moment of desperation, I lunged toward the door, breaking free of the paralysis briefly. The shadow recoiled, almost amused, but remained present, looming over me like a predator watching its prey. I ran, stumbling, barely managing to reach my mother in the living room. She flicked on all the lights, and for the first time that night the room felt momentarily normal, but the sense of danger didn't vanish. Even in the brightly lit room, the apartment's oppressive weight lingered. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, every faint whisper reminded me that it had not relented. It was patient, waiting, knowing I would be vulnerable again. By the end of the night, I collapsed, trembling, drenched in sweat, barely able to move. My body and mind were breaking, and I knew that the apartment's power thrived on this. Every day of fear, every night of paralysis, every whisper and shadow had made it stronger in ways I could not fight alone. Even in that exhaustion, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, haunted by the echo of its whispers. "I am here. I see you. You cannot hide." It was clear that unless I left that apartment, this terror would continue indefinitely. The breaking point had been reached. The apartment had fully claimed its power over my life. By the 8th week, I realized that staying in the apartment was no longer an option. The presence had grown relentless, invading every corner of my mind and body. The shadows, the whispers, the violent malfunctions of objects. It was all orchestrated to break me. Every night, sleep paralysis held me hostage. Every day, the apartment's walls seemed to close in tighter, watching, waiting. One evening, I made the decision. I would leave. I packed my belongings with trembling hands, my eyes constantly darting toward the corners of the rooms. Every flicker of the lights felt like a warning, every subtle creak like footsteps behind me. The apartment was aware of my plan. I could feel its gaze on me, its patience thinning into anticipation. As I carried a box from my room to the door, the refrigerator slammed open violently. The lamp tipped over, spilling hot wax across the floor. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched and twisted, forming shapes that almost resembled figures that lunged at me in the corner of my vision. My heart raced, pounding in my ears. I stumbled, nearly dropping the box. The whispers returned, louder than ever, now clear and cutting through the air. "You cannot leave. You belong here. I see you." I ran. I didn't look back. I stumbled through the hallway, over fallen books and overturned chairs, the ceiling fan trembling above me. The shadows seemed to chase me, flickering along the walls, trying to block my escape. I could hear the apartment itself groaning, twisting, pushing against me, as if the entire building was alive and determined to keep me inside. I reached the door, fumbling with the lock, my hands slick with sweat. The whispers screamed now, almost deafening. "Do not leave. You are mine!" With a final surge of adrenaline, I opened the door and bolted into the hallway outside. The building seemed to shudder behind me, groaning as if in rage. I didn't stop running until I was out on the street, gasping for air. The night breeze cutting across my skin like a blade. Even then I could feel it, the presence lingering, watching from within the apartment, patient like a predator left behind. But I had escaped, at least physically. My body trembled, feverish and weak, but I was free from its immediate grasp. The trauma, however, remained. Sleep paralysis continued for years after, dreams haunted by shadows, whispers and flickering lights. My mind replayed the events, amplifying fear, keeping me tethered to that apartment long after I left. Even now I cannot sleep alone without a lingering sense of dread, a faint whisper at the edge of awareness. I see you. I am here, you cannot hide. I survived the apartment, but the apartment had left its mark, indelible, terrifying and permanent. After leaving the apartment, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Physically, my body recovered. The fever, fainting and muscle tremors subsided over time, but the psychological mark remained. The shadows, the whispers, the overwhelming fear, they didn't vanish. They lingered, a quiet echo in the corners of my mind. Even in a new, safe apartment, sleep was never easy. Every creak, every flicker of light, every gust of wind reminded me of the apartment I had escaped. Sleep paralysis returned intermittently, and I would lie frozen, feeling unseen pressure, the phantom weight of a presence that had once consumed me. My heart would race and whispers just at the edge of hearing would echo in my mind. I see you. I am here, you cannot hide. I had nightmares that blurred the line between dream and reality. The shadow of the apartment followed me, not in form but in essence, a reminder that fear could linger long after the immediate danger had passed. I became cautious, hyper-aware of my surroundings, especially at night. Sleeping alone felt impossible. The trauma of the apartment had left deep scars. Despite this, I began to rebuild my life. Friends and family became a buffer against the lingering fear. Routine and light brought stability. I learned grounding techniques, focusing on the physical world, counting objects, listening to ambient sounds, to help separate myself from the remnants of that terror. Slowly the nights became bearable, though the memory never faded. Yet even in moments of calm, the story of that apartment remains with me. It taught me that fear can manifest in ways beyond explanation, that unseen forces, real or imagined, can exploit our vulnerability. I learned the fragility of human perception, the power of panic, and the deep psychological impact of prolonged terror. And sometimes, in the quiet of night, when the world is still, I can almost hear it. I see you. I am here, you cannot hide. The apartment may be behind me, but its mark is permanent. It shaped the way I perceive shadows, sounds, and silence. It left me with the knowledge that even after escape, some presences never truly leave. They linger quietly, waiting at the edges of memory. I survived, but I carry the echoes. When my cousin got a new job, he rented a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The property was isolated, surrounded by old oak trees and rolling fields. From the outside, it looked charming. A quaint, quiet place perfect for someone seeking solitude and focus. My cousin was excited. It was a fresh start, a new chapter, and he wanted to make it his own. The first few days were ordinary. He unpacked his things, arranged furniture, and explored the land around the house. It felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. Yet there was something slightly off about the farmhouse. Doors didn't close evenly. Floorboards creaked in odd places, and sometimes he could swear he felt a chill in rooms that weren't drafty. After a week, he began noticing small things. A chair slightly moved, a book on the table shifted position, and kitchen utensils weren't where he remembered leaving them. At first, he dismissed it as forgetfulness or perhaps the wind, though the windows were closed. Curiosity and unease grew. He decided to confront the landlord. When he asked if she had been coming in while he was out, she shook her head. Then, hesitating, she added, almost as if it pained her to say it, "There's something I should have told you before you moved in. The house is haunted." My cousin laughed nervously. Haunted? Civil War soldiers were buried on the property, she explained, and she believed their spirits lingered. He didn't believe a word. Soldiers buried hundreds of years ago. It sounded ridiculous. Still, the unease had already taken root. To prove the truth or the falsehood, he installed cameras around the house. He wanted evidence, rational explanation, or at the very least, peace of mind. Then, a week later, he went out of town for work. He returned eager to review the footage, and what he saw left him stunned. Objects were moving seemingly on their own. Chairs shifted slightly, doors opened and closed without anyone touching them, and kitchen utensils toppled as if guided by invisible hands. He didn't know what to make of it. A friend introduced him to a paranormal investigator, someone who specialized in hauntings. The investigator visited, and after examining the house, told him there was indeed a spirit present. But the message was calm, almost reassuring. The spirit would do no harm as long as he left it alone. Comforted, or at least convinced enough, my cousin decided to stay. The disturbances were minor. Things moved, yes, but he was unharmed, and the thought of the spirit being passive made him rationalize it as part of the house's history. Life went on. Then he started dating a woman. At first she noticed nothing, but gradually she began seeing the signs. Books slightly out of place, utensils missing or moved, doors creaking when no one was near. When she asked, my cousin explained the haunting. She laughed, mocking him, dismissing the idea of ghosts as nonsense. He tried to warn her, don't mock it, don't anger it, but she didn't listen. That night, everything changed. At first, the girlfriend laughed off the small anomalies. She teased him about being paranoid, joking that he had an overactive imagination. But soon, she began noticing the same strange occurrences he had described. A chair slightly out of place, a book on the floor where she knew it hadn't been. Kitchen utensils mysteriously moved. One evening after dinner, they were both in the kitchen. The girlfriend was cleaning up, while my cousin leaned against the counter. He reminded her gently, "Remember, just leave things alone. Don't provoke it." She rolled her eyes. "It's nothing. You're imagining it. There's no such thing as ghosts," she said, laughing as she tapped the counter. Then it happened. My cousin stepped out briefly into the living room, and when he returned, he noticed her flinch. She held her cheek, her hand trembling slightly. "Something slapped me," she said, voice shaking but trying to laugh it off. Her right cheek was bright red, the mark of a sudden, forceful strike. My cousin's blood ran cold. He immediately knew that this was no ordinary prank or coincidence. The spirit was no longer passive. It had made contact. Panic set in. He grabbed her hand, urging her toward the door. "We're leaving now. Don't touch anything else. Don't look back." Objects around them seemed to respond. A book fell from a shelf, clattering loudly. The ceiling fan above shuddered, wobbling as if it were alive. Shadows shifted unnaturally across the room, stretching toward them. The girlfriend screamed, realizing the truth in that moment. The mocking laughter and disbelief had vanished, replaced by raw terror. She clutched her cheek, now painfully throbbing, and ran toward the front door with my cousin following. They didn't stop until they were out on the street, the cool night air hitting them, making them feel momentarily safe. The house loomed behind them, silent but oppressive, as if watching their retreat. My cousin realized then that staying any longer would be dangerous. He paid someone to remove his belongings, refusing to go back inside. Later he learned that the landlord's grandson had been attacked in the house as well, confirming that the disturbances were not just pranks or coincidences. Eventually, the landlord tore down the house and sold the property, ending the chapter that had terrorized my cousin and anyone who had dared to live there. Even after leaving, the memory lingered. The feeling of being watched, the sudden, violent slap, and the realization that the spirit could act in the physical world remained a chilling reminder. My cousin never doubted the presence again, and neither did anyone who heard the story. After the initial disturbances, my cousin became more vigilant. He began keeping detailed notes of every anomaly. Chairs slightly shifted, kitchen utensils missing, doors creaking when no one was around. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night to find objects on the floor that he was certain he had left on tables or shelves. His curiosity and frustration led him to install cameras throughout the house. He placed them in the kitchen, living room, and hallway, aiming to catch whoever or whatever was responsible. A week later, he went out of town for work. When he returned, he reviewed the footage, expecting to find perhaps a stray animal or some rational explanation. What he saw shocked him. Objects moved seemingly on their own. A chair in the living room shifted an inch or two without anyone nearby. A book slid across the floor in the kitchen as if pushed. Utensils toppled from counters. Nothing else appeared on the footage. No humans, no pets, nothing. but the movement was clear. He shared the footage with a friend who knew a paranormal investigator. The investigator came to the farmhouse to examine it in person. After carefully inspecting the rooms, the investigator confirmed the presence of a spirit. He explained that the entity would not harm anyone if left undisturbed. The voice of the investigator was calm, almost reassuring, but my cousin felt a chill as the words sank in. "Its energy is attached to this place," the investigator said. "It seems persistent, but passive. As long as you respect it, you'll be fine." My cousin left the cameras running, determined to see the spirit but hoping it would remain passive. Days passed, and indeed nothing threatening occurred. Objects moved, yes, but nothing dangerous. He convinced himself that he could coexist with the presence, a silent tenant of the house. Then he started dating. The woman initially laughed at the strange occurrences. She mocked his fears, dismissing the haunting as nonsense. My cousin warned her, "The spirit exists and it should not be provoked." She shrugged, teasing him, unconcerned. But the spirit had begun to react. Small objects moved around her, subtly at first, enough to make her pause and glance around. Then one night, the terrifying event occurred, the slap across her face bringing the haunting into sharp, undeniable reality. After that night, my cousin understood the full scope of the danger. The spirit could interact physically, and mocking it, ignoring its presence, or treating it lightly could provoke it into action. The investigator's words echoed in his mind. Respect it, leave it alone. But the entity's patience was not infinite. This awareness marked the turning point. The harmless disturbances had escalated into direct, undeniable interaction. The farmhouse was no longer just creepy or unsettling. It was dangerous. After the paranormal investigator's visit, my cousin tried to live as normally as possible. He went about his daily routines, cautiously avoiding provoking the spirit. But the farmhouse seemed to have its own rhythm, one that he was not privy to. Objects continued to move. Books slid from shelves without warning. Chairs were slightly askew, even after he meticulously aligned them. Kitchen utensils sometimes disappeared from counters, only to appear in places he had already checked. The disturbances were no longer random. They followed him, almost as if the spirit was observing his habits, learning his patterns. When his girlfriend stayed over, the disturbances began to affect her as well. At first, she dismissed the oddities, a cup slightly off the table, a book moved from the shelf, but the subtler movements escalated. One evening, while she was cooking dinner, a knife fell from the counter inches from her hand. She gasped, startled, and my cousin calmly but firmly reminded her, "Leave it alone. Don't antagonize it." She laughed nervously, brushing it off as coincidence. That laughter, however, seemed to provoke the presence. Later that night, she found herself shivering uncontrollably in bed despite the warmth of the room. Shadows seemed to move at the periphery of her vision, darker than the natural dimness of the room. She froze, unable to move, and felt a heavy weight press down on her chest. Her eyes darted around, and for a brief moment, she swore she saw a figure standing silently in the corner. The next day, she began noticing subtle marks, objects slightly damaged, a chair tipped over. She mentioned it to my cousin, laughing uneasily, still trying to rationalize it, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted. The spirit was no longer passive. It was testing boundaries. Then came the slap. That single violent strike across her face changed everything. She screamed in shock, her cheek burning, and my cousin realized the entity had crossed the line from subtle interference to direct physical interaction. Panic gripped them both. They ran out of the house, the air around the farmhouse thick and oppressive, as if the building itself was aware of their escape. The slap was more than a warning. It was proof that the spirit could act, and that mocking or ignoring it had consequences. My cousin understood then that leaving the house was the only safe choice. The paranormal investigator's words echoed in his mind, warning that while the spirit might not be inherently malicious, it could defend itself when provoked. That night marked the end of their time in the farmhouse. My cousin refused to return, paying someone to remove his belongings while ensuring neither of them stepped foot inside again. The haunting had escalated beyond subtlety, turning the charming farmhouse into a place of undeniable, terrifying power. After the slap incident, my cousin refused to go back into the farmhouse. He had paid someone to collect his belongings, and even retrieving them required careful planning. No one could enter without risking the spirit's reaction. The house was no longer just haunted. It was actively dangerous. Later, he learned from the landlord that the story wasn't unique to him. Years earlier, her grandson had been attacked inside the same house. He had been alone in the living room when objects began to move violently. Chairs tipped over, a heavy bookcase wobbled as if pushed, and a sudden force had struck him across the chest. He escaped physically unharmed, but the experience had left him terrified and he never returned. Hearing this, my cousin realized the full scope of what he had faced. This wasn't a minor haunting or a trick of the mind. The spirit was tied to the land itself. Civil War soldiers buried beneath the property, and it had a history of interacting with anyone who dared to occupy the farmhouse. The landlord confessed that she had eventually decided to tear down the house. The property had become too dangerous to remain standing. The haunting wasn't just a story. It was a tangible presence with the capacity to cause fear and physical harm. When my cousin and his girlfriend walked away from the property for the last time, the house loomed silently behind them. Empty, demolished, or sold to strangers, it no longer mattered. The memory of what happened inside remained imprinted in their minds. The slap, the moving objects, the shadows in the corners of rooms, all were burned into their memories, leaving them with a permanent reminder of the danger that had lurked behind the farmhouse's quaint exterior. Even after the house was gone, my cousin never doubted the events he experienced. The presence had marked him, and everyone who had mocked or ignored it. The story of the farmhouse became a cautionary tale, proof that some places carry histories too potent, and some spirits demand respect, or they will make themselves known in ways impossible to ignore. After the initial disturbances, my cousin became hyper-aware of every movement in the house. Even the slightest sound, a floorboard creak, a faucet dripping, the rustle of leaves outside, set his heart racing. He developed routines to check rooms, ensure doors were locked and keep objects where they belonged, but it never felt like enough. The farmhouse had its own rules, and he was only beginning to understand them. The first few days, the anomalies were small and subtle. A book would fall off a shelf, a chair would be slightly shifted, utensils would vanish from the counter. He rationalized most of it. Perhaps he had misplaced things, or a breeze from an old window caused movement. Yet the longer he stayed, the more he noticed patterns. Objects moved when he wasn't looking, almost in response to his presence. He felt eyes on him, though the house was empty. One night he sat in the living room reading, feeling the heavy silence that hung in the house. A shadow flickered across the corner of the room. He froze, staring, but nothing moved. The air felt thick, almost pressing in on him. He whispered, "Is anyone here?" The house remained silent, but a plate on the counter slid slightly toward the edge. He jumped up to catch it, but it stopped halfway. It was as if the house were teasing him, testing his reactions. After a week, he began noticing more aggressive disturbances. Doors slammed shut on their own. The kitchen table sometimes shook, and objects would fall without explanation. He installed cameras to catch it in action, hoping for evidence and rational explanation. But when he reviewed the footage, nothing appeared. No people, no animals, but objects moved with an almost intelligent force. His friend connected him with a paranormal investigator who visited the house. The investigator walked through every room, examining furniture, floors, and walls. After hours of observation, he declared, "There is a spirit here. It's persistent but passive. As long as you leave it alone, it should not harm you. But it responds to provocation, disrespect, or disbelief." Armed with this knowledge, my cousin tried to coexist with the presence. The disturbances continued, but he avoided provoking it. Then he began dating. His girlfriend was skeptical, dismissing the house's quirks as imagination. She laughed when books moved or chairs shifted. But the more she mocked, the more the house seemed to respond. Shadows lengthened near her, objects fell more often, and strange sounds echoed through the rooms. One evening, the tension reached its peak. The girlfriend was in the kitchen when she suddenly felt a sharp impact on her face. My cousin rushed in to find her cheek red and stinging. Objects had shifted violently around her, and the presence had made contact for the first time. Fear overtook disbelief. The house was no longer just haunted. It was dangerous. They ran from the farmhouse, the oppressive air seeming to push them toward the safety of the open yard. That night, the farmhouse marked its warning. respect it, or face consequences. As the days passed, the farmhouse became increasingly uninhabitable. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light felt deliberate, almost taunting. My cousin and his girlfriend moved through the house like cautious intruders, careful not to trigger the presence. Objects continued to shift. Books fell from shelves, chairs tipped over, and kitchen utensils disappeared only to reappear in strange places. The air felt heavier, colder, and charged with something unseen. At night, the couple slept fitfully. Shadows crept along the walls, and strange whispers seemed to echo from empty corners. Sleep paralysis began to affect both of them, leaving them frozen and gasping for breath, with the sensation that something was leaning over them. The girlfriend had become visibly anxious. She no longer laughed or mocked the disturbances. Instead, she flinched at every sound, her eyes constantly scanning the corners of the rooms. My cousin tried to reassure her, reminding her of the investigator's warning. The spirit would do no harm if left alone. But the house's energy had grown stronger, almost impatient. One afternoon, the couple was cleaning the living room. My cousin noticed a shadow flicker across the hallway. Too fast, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. Moments later, a book flew from the shelf toward the girlfriend. She ducked instinctively, but the force of the moving object sent it skidding across the floor. Both froze, realizing the spirit was now acting physically in response to their presence. The final escalation came unexpectedly. One evening, while preparing dinner, the girlfriend was struck across the face. The slap was sudden, painful, and unmistakably real. She screamed, tears forming in her eyes, and my cousin rushed to her side. The room felt charged, almost alive, the shadows twisting as if pleased with their terror. Fear became immediate and overpowering. They abandoned any pretense of normalcy. Without hesitation, they ran out of the house, not daring to glance back. The farmhouse loomed silently behind them, a dark sentinel watching their retreat. After that night, my cousin arranged for someone to remove his belongings. Neither he nor his girlfriend ever returned. The events of the farmhouse were undeniable. The spirit could act, it could cause harm, and it would continue to exist until the house was gone. The landlord, understanding the danger, eventually tore down the house and sold the property. But the memory of those final days, the shadows, the whispers, the slap, remained etched into my cousin's mind, a chilling reminder of the farmhouse's persistent presence. After leaving the farmhouse, my cousin and his girlfriend tried to rebuild a sense of normal life, but the memories of the haunting clung to them. Everyday sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the tapping of a faucet, or a sudden gust of wind, could send a shiver down their spines. Even in new apartments, well lit and modern, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, and every flicker of light brought back the feeling of being watched. Sleep became a battleground. Both of them experienced episodes reminiscent of the farmhouse's presence. My cousin would wake in the middle of the night, paralyzed, feeling a heavy weight pressing down on him. He could sense movement in the darkness, whispers just out of reach of comprehension. His girlfriend, once skeptical, would startle at ordinary noises, expecting objects to move on their own or to feel the phantom slap again. Psychologically, the trauma manifested in hypervigilance and constant tension. My cousin became meticulous about checking doors, windows, and lights, fearing the return of an unseen presence. He avoided staying in empty rooms for too long, and he found it difficult to be alone, even in familiar spaces. The experience left an indelible mark on their trust in reality. What had seemed impossible, a spirit capable of moving objects and striking a living person, was real. Rational explanations felt inadequate, and even conversations about the event could trigger anxiety, fear, and anger. For years, both my cousin and his girlfriend would discuss the farmhouse in hushed tones, sharing details with friends and family only sparingly. The story was no longer just a frightening memory. It had become a cautionary tale, illustrating how the energy of a place, especially one marked by death and unresolved history, could linger and affect anyone who dared to occupy it. Even long after the house was gone, they carried the knowledge that some presences are patient, persistent, and reactive. The slap, the flying objects, the subtle manipulations of the house, all were a warning: respect the past, respect the space, or risk its wrath. Although physically safe, the psychological shadows remained. Sleep paralysis, sudden fear, and the uneasy feeling of being observed became part of their daily lives. They learned to live with it, adapting routines, finding comfort in company, and avoiding triggers. But the haunting had left its mark, proving that some experiences cannot be forgotten or fully escaped. The farmhouse was demolished. The land sold, and yet the memories endured. A haunting reminder that even after escape, some shadows never truly fade. Months after leaving the farmhouse, my cousin and his girlfriend tried to move on completely. They found a new apartment, brighter, modern, and completely free of the unsettling energy of the farmhouse. Yet the memory of what they experienced remained sharp, almost tangible. Even in safe spaces, my cousin would sometimes feel a presence out of the corner of his eye, fleeting shadows that vanished when he turned to look. The memory of the slap haunted him, the sheer suddenness of it, the unmistakable force. He began keeping a journal, detailing each recurring feeling of unease, trying to understand the lingering psychological impact. One night, he awoke suddenly. He was sure he had heard something, a soft, deliberate tap, like fingernails lightly drumming on a countertop. His girlfriend stirred beside him, wide-eyed. Both of them froze, listening. There was nothing, no wind, no creaking pipes, no pets, but the sound had felt deliberate, almost teasing. It was as though the farmhouse, or the spirit connected to it, was sending a final reminder that it had not fully left their lives. They reassured each other, tried to rationalize it, and eventually went back to sleep. Yet even during waking hours, my cousin remained hyper-vigilant. He avoided leaving objects out of place, avoided mocking stories of hauntings, and kept his distance from isolated older properties. The psychological imprint of the farmhouse had created a lasting fear, one that informed the way he perceived shadows, sounds, and sudden movements. Through conversations with friends, family, and the paranormal investigator, he learned that such spirits, especially those connected to violent histories or burial grounds, can linger long after their physical space is gone. The demolition of the farmhouse had removed the structure, but the energy tied to it, the presence that had made itself known, could not be destroyed so easily. This realization was chilling. The physical threat was gone, but the mental and emotional imprint remained. Every creak, flicker, or shadow could trigger memories, and every unexplainable event risked opening the door to the same fear he had experienced before. The house may have been gone, but its echo endured, and he understood that the world sometimes held forces that could not be rationalized, controlled, or entirely escaped. The story became a quiet caution. Some presences demand respect, and some experiences leave marks deeper than any physical wound. My cousin had survived, but he knew some shadows follow you long after the threat is gone. Years later, the farmhouse was gone, replaced by a blank, sold-off lot. My cousin and his girlfriend had moved on physically, yet the haunting experience had left a permanent mark on both of them. Even in their new home, quiet moments could trigger vivid memories. The sudden slap, objects shifting on their own, shadows twisting in corners. The experience had reshaped the way they interacted with the world. Both became hyper-aware of their surroundings, sensitive to subtle sounds, drafts, and movements. Ordinary creaks in a floorboard or flickers in a light would instantly recall the terror they had endured. Sleep was no longer a refuge. Episodes of paralysis, nightmares, and the feeling of being watched sometimes returned, leaving them shaken and exhausted. Yet, alongside the fear, there was a cautious respect. They understood that not all presences are meant to be understood or controlled. Some demand acknowledgement, boundaries, and above all, respect. The farmhouse had been a stark lesson in the power of unseen forces, reminders of the past that can manifest in the present, shaping the living in ways impossible to ignore. Occasionally, my cousin would recount the story to friends or family, emphasizing the importance of not mocking or dismissing the unknown. The slap, the shadows, the movement of objects, all had been real, and all had left a mark deeper than the physical. Even after so many years, there remained a faint, almost imperceptible sense of being observed. A corner of a room, a shadow across the wall, a fleeting chill in the air, small echoes of the farmhouse and the spirit that had lived within it. The haunting had ended. The house was gone, yet its legacy persisted. My cousin and his girlfriend had survived, but the memory of the farmhouse and its restless presence remained, an indelible reminder that some shadows never fully disappear. And somewhere, in the spaces where the past and present meet, the spirit waits, patient, persistent, and ever watchful.